This is Mrs. Terry, and we're going to discuss today Module 1 in VNSG 1505 Health Science. There are 4 chapters, as you remember, in Module 1, chapters 1, 2, 3, and 6. So I will go over this very quickly with you. You have your reading, you have the videos that I posted from YouTube, and this will just be an addition to those and the PowerPoints. So the first chapter is called The Introduction to Anatomy. Anatomy is the branch of science that studies the structure of the body. An example, what the heart looks like. The anatomy, the physiology of it is the branch of science that describes how the body functions. In other words, how the heart beats. There are 12 major organ systems of the body. The integumentary system, that's the skin, the skeletal, the muscular, the nervous, the endocrine, the circulatory, the lymphatic, the immune, the respiratory, the digestive, the urinary, and the reproductive. And there are examples in the book, some very good figures and diagrams in the book that will help you master those. You will need to know these systems and what organs are in each system. And as I said before, the textbook has some good examples of that. Atoms, just for your knowledge, are the smallest part of the organism, and we will study atoms in later chapters. In nursing, the anatomical terms are very important as they help describe, as you are a student and as a nurse, the position of your patient when you're talking to your colleagues, trying to describe your patient, or when you're documenting in the chart. You will need to know all of the anatomical terms. The relative positions, these terms describe the position of one part of the body in relation to the other, so they're relative to one another. And these are considered directional terms. So examples are superior and inferior. Superior meaning to the top, inferior, lower. Anterior, posterior. Anterior is on the front, posterior is on the back. Medial and lateral, proximal, distal, superficial, deep, central, and peripheral. So please study those and know the difference in those terms. Then we have planes of the body. So the body is broken into different planes from side to side or top to bottom. The sagittal plane divides the body lengthwise into the right and left portions. The frontal plane, as you would think, describes the body into anterior or ventral and posterior or dorsal portions. So the anterior of the body can be called that or the ventral. And you'll hear that more described when they're talking about organs. And then the posterior is the back of the body or the dorsal. And you know, the fish, they have dorsal fins. That's considered the back of their body. The frontal plane is also called the coronal plane. And the book shows you that, or they'll diagram that with a crown on top of someone's head, so you'll help remember the coronal plane. Transverse divides the body horizontally, creating an upper or superior portion and a lower or inferior portion. So these are all planes of the body, and you will see these used in describing patients and how you're going to describe a patient. Regional terms, look in your textbook. There's a good discussion on that for anterior and posterior views. You will be asked on the test terms such as an example would be the antecubical space is what? And the answer is it's an area in front of the elbow. And so you will learn antecubical is in front of the elbow, and that's where IVs are started a lot of times, in the antecubical space. Or you might see the gluteal region is what? It is posterior on the body. So the gluteal muscle is posterior on the back of the body. And that's how you will begin describing your patients. Then we have major body cavities. These The organs, which are also called viscera, are located within cavities of the body. Cavities are large internal spaces. The lungs sit in a cavity, the abdominal organs sit in a cavity, etc. There are two major cavities, the ventral cavity and the dorsal cavity. Remember, dorsal is on the back. These cavities are then divided into divisions and into quadrants and into regions. You will need to know these distinctions for the rest of your nursing career. You need to put them to memory, so you need to go in. It's also good to, your coloring book is excellent. It is part of your homework, but it has valuable information on the opposite side of the page that you're going to be coloring. It has very good information describing these items in detail, but you do have homework on the planes of the body. I'm not sure it's on the planes, I'm not sure what it's on, but it is on this chapter 1, helping you learn these terms. Speaking of what you need to know, always rethink information in your textbooks, as well as the sum it up in your textbooks. Know all of the terminology. There's a lot of terminology this semester. And also at the end of the chapter, there are usually medical terms and disorders. It's very important for you to start learning these disorders because you will now begin to start seeing them and talking about them. Always study and know the figures and the tables in your book. They're very, very good. Excuse me. Chapter 2 is basic chemistry. Chemistry is the study of matter. Matter is anything that occupies space and has weight. That is matter. Matter exists in 3 states: solid, liquid, and gas. I'm sure you've learned about this in your previous science studies. Matter can undergo both physical and chemical changes. All matter, living or dead, is composed of elements. An element is matter that is composed of atoms and have the same number of positive charges in their nuclei. So, an element is matter that is composed of atoms and has the same number of positive charges in their nuclei. As I said before, an atom is the smallest unit of an element with that element's chemical characteristics. An atom is composed of 3 subatomic particles: protons, neutrons, and electrons. In each atom, the number of protons is equal to the number of electrons. The atom, therefore, is electrically neutral. It carries no net electrical charge. So an atom is neutral. So what makes it different from one atom different from the other? The difference is primarily in the number of protons and electrons in each atom. You will see in the textbook a table with the common elements in the human body. These are very important for you to memorize, as you will see these throughout your career. Examples are hydrogen, nitrogen, sodium, calcium, potassium, magnesium. There's a list of them, and you will start talking about those. You will do lab values on those. You will understand how a high or a low value in your patient's bloodstream can affect your patient. So these elements are very, very important to us and our well-being. Atoms are attracted to each other because they want to achieve a stable outer electron shell. In other words, they want to fill or empty the outer electron shell. The force of attraction between the atoms is similar to the force of 2 magnets. When you try to separate the magnets, you can feel the pull. The electrical attraction between atoms is a chemical bond. The 3 types of chemical bonds are ionic, covalent, and hydrogen bonds. Bonds, not bonds. Ionic are caused by the transfer of electrons between atoms. Covalent bonds are caused by the sharing of electrons by the outer shells. It is like joining hands, so they share these electrons. Hydrogen bonds are different than the other is not caused by the transfer or sharing of electrons. A hydrogen bond is caused by the attraction of molecules. An ion are atoms that carry an electrical charge. If the ion is positively charged, it is a cation. If the ion is negatively charged, it is called an anion. And I would highly recommend, and I think I've told you before, that when you get your chapters, you start diagramming. As the book is very good, it is simple enough to where you can read it and understand it, but in my opinion, you need to march out each one of these sections, draw you some diagrams so that you can master such as the information about ions. An electrolyte is a substance that forms ions when it is dissolved in water. Electrolytes are capable of conducting an electrical current, thus electrolytes. For example, the electrocardiogram, EKG, is a record of electrical events in the heart. The EEG are electrical events in the brain. So these are capable of conducting electrical currents, and so we will see that when we look at the heart, the rhythm of the heart, when we look at the brain, that sort of thing. Moving along, we're going to talk about a little bit about acids and bases. A normal functioning body requires a balance between substances classified as acids and bases. Acid-base balance is important because the chemical reactions in the body occur only when these substances are in balance. Imbalances of acids and bases are common and cause life-threatening clinical problems. So if you get a patient that comes in respiratory acidosis, respiratory alkalosis, any kind of imbalance in this acid or base, they are in serious health problems. An acid is an electrolyte that dissolves into hydrogen ions. Very, very important for you to remember this. It dissolves into a hydrogen ion and an ion. That's an acid. The amount of hydrogen in a solution determines its acidity, and you will hear that over and over. So remember, to be acid, it has a lot of hydrogen ions. A base is substances that combine with hydrogen. A base makes a solution less acidic. So the less hydrogen, the more alkaline. We'll talk about the pH scale. This scale indicates how many hydrogen, remember what I told you, hydrogen ions are in a solution. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14, and there is one in your book, very easy to read. The midpoint of the scale, or the neutral pH, is 7. 0 to 14, the middle is 7. A pH that measures less than 7 on the scale indicates that the solution has more hydrogen. And then what did we say? The more hydrogen, the more acidic it is. So the lower the scale, the more the client is considered acidic. The pH of stomach contents, for an example, ranges between 1 to 4. So we know the pH of our stomach, contents of our stomach, are very highly acidic. Hydrochloric acid, that sort of thing. So that is low on the pH scale, 1 to 4. A pH measuring more than 7, which 7 is neutral, indicates fewer hydrogen ions. These substances are bases, and the solution is said to be basic or alkaline. So the higher the number on the pH scale, the patient is considered alkaline, or the substance is alkaline. Blood pH is maintained within a narrow range. 7.35 to 7.45 is considered the pH of blood, slightly alkaline, because it's above 7. So you need to know and understand the pH basic scale, and we will talk more about that as we go into disease processes. And Blood is regulated on a minute-by-minute pH basis by three means. A buffering system, the lungs, and the kidneys. They help regulate our blood so that we do not become acidic or alkalinic. And you'll study more about this. Like I said, a good example is respiratory. If we become, our pH starts rising or lowering, you'll see our respirations will increase or decrease, depending on what the pH level is. A term that you'll hear often is ATP, adenosine triphosphate, ATP. And I think you'll probably be tested on it. It is the energy used to power the body from the foods we eat. As the food is broken down, energy is released. ATP is that energy. This energy cannot be used directly by the cells. The energy must first be transferred to this substance called ATP. ATP is an energy transferring molecule. And we will talk about ATP more in depth. Mixtures, and we're still in chapter 2. Mixtures are combinations of two or more substances that can be separated by ordinary physical means. When separated, the substances retain their original properties. Solutions are mixtures that particles are mixed together remain evenly distributed. Salt and water is an example of a solution. The solution has two parts, a solvent and a solute. The solute is the substance present in the smaller amount. It is the substance being dissolved. Salt and water, salt would be the solute. Solvent is the part of the solution present in the greater amount, so water would be the solvent. It does the dissolving and is usually a liquid or a gas. Now that was really fast on cells, but it's basic chemistry, and I believe when you read your text, look at the PowerPoints, look at the YouTube videos that I have posted. I know they look like a lot of videos. Most of them are 6-8 minutes long. They are full of information, and I thought it would be good this semester to present some of the experts in the field in these specific matters, and it would make it more interesting for you rather than just sitting and listening to me all the time. All right, moving along to chapter 3, cells. In the 1600s, there was a man named Robert Hooke, and he was looking under a microscope. Imagine they had a microscope in 1600. He was a monk, and he noticed these cubicles when he looked in the microscope, and they reminded him of where the monks slept, or what he called the cells in which they stayed in. Thus he named the cells that he saw in the microscope cells, and that's how the term cells came about. And we call cytology is the study of cellular structure and function. The cell is the structural and functional unit of all living matters. Cells vary considerably in size, shape, and function. The nucleus is the center of the cell. I'm sure you've heard that when you were in your science classes. It contains the genetic information and controls all protein synthesis. The nucleus is filled with a substance called nucleoplasm. Within the nucleoplasm are the nucleolus and the chromatin. The chromatin is composed of strands of DNA. They carry the genetic code. So I find it very interesting. As small as a cell is, each cell has a nucleus. Within that nucleus is the chromatin, and within that is the DNA that decides how our body is going to function. In the textbook, there's a drawing of a typical cell and the table containing the cell structure and function. You need to know the cell structure, the parts of the cell membrane, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, and the organelles. An example, I might ask you, what are the hair-like projections that move substances across the surface of a cell membrane? And those are the villi. So you would need to understand and know the different parts of the cell and their functions. Passive transport mechanisms. The passive mechanisms that move substances across the membrane include diffusion, osmosis, and filtration. I'm sure you've heard of osmosis, filtration, and diffusion in your studies previously. There's good illustrations in the book regarding these mechanisms. Diffusion is the most common transport mechanism. It is the movement of a substance from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. So a good example in the book, if you drop a tablet, an aspirin for an example, in a glass of water, it moves from higher concentration of the tablet into lower concentration. So as it dissolves, then it diffuses and until it is equal, or what we call equilibrium. The textbook also describes the scent of a skunk as diffusion. I had never thought of that, but I guess that would be true. Higher concentration to lower concentration. Osmosis is a special kind of diffusion. It is the diffusion of water through a selectively permeable membrane, or a semi-permeable membrane it's called, allowing for the passage of some substances while restricting the passage of others, so it's semi-permeable. During osmosis, the water diffuses from an area with more water to one with less. The dissolved substances, however, do not move. Tonicity is the ability of a solution to affect the volume and pressure within a cell. There are three terms used to illustrate tonicity: isotonic, hypotonic, hypertonic, and you will hear these throughout the rest of your nursing career. Isotonic solutions have the same concentration as intracellular fluid. That means, in other words, they're the same. Consider a red blood cell placed in an isotonic solution. No movement of water occurs and the red blood cell remains the same. Numerous isotonic solutions are used clinically and administered intravenously. Common isotonic solutions include normal saline, what we call D5W, or dextrose in water, and Ringer solution, which has a lot of electrolytes in it. So you think about it, as a nurse, we want to give an isotonic solution to our patient if, let's say, they're dehydrated, because we do not want to be destroying their red blood cells. So we want to give them an isotonic solution. Hypotonic solution: if a red blood cell is placed in pure water, a solution containing no solutes, it's just water, then water moves into the cell by osmosis, from where there is more water to where there is less. So the water's going to move into the cell. The pure water, being more dilute than the inside of the cell, is to be called hypotonic. Hypotonic solutions cause red blood cells to burst because that water is moving in a process called hemolysis. Hemolysis means destruction of the red blood cells. So that water moved into those red blood cells and caused hemolysis. Because of hemolysis, pure water is not used for IV fluids. So that's why we give what we call normal saline. It has some saline in it, electrolytes, or some dextrose, that sort of thing. Hypertonic solutions: if a red blood cell is placed within a very concentrated salt solution, so there's a lot of salt in there, water diffuses out of the red blood cell into the solution, causing the red blood cell then to shrink. The salt solution is referred to as hypertonic. Active transport. Here we are with ATP again. It refers to the transport mechanisms that require an input of energy, or ATP. Endocytosis is a transport mechanism that involves the intake of food or liquid by the cell membrane, so endocytosis. Exocytosis moves substances out of the cells. Example: pancreas makes certain proteins for use outside of the pancreas. The pancreatic cells synthesize the protein, wrap it in a membrane, and then moves it toward and fuses with the cell membrane. The protein is then expelled from the vesicle to the surrounding space. So that's exocytosis, when we're moving substances out of our cell, example the pancreas, and we'll move it into the bloodstream. Cell differentiation, cells are specialized or they're differentiated. A poorly differentiated cell means something is not right. So cells have a certain design and certain reason for why they exist. If they're poorly differentiated, it could mean that the patient, more than likely means the patient has cancer or some other disease. So if you have a patient who's had a biopsy and the biopsy comes back poorly differentiated cells, it means something is not right with those cells that are supposed to be, and that is characteristic of cancer. All right, moving to chapter 6, tissues and membranes. We'll go this kind of rapidly as this is getting long. Now we see how the cells that we discussed earlier are arranged to perform specific functions. Tissues are groups of cells that are similar to each other in structure and function. 4 major types of tissues are epithelial, connective, nervous, and muscular. The study of tissues is called histology. There is a table that describes the types of epithelial tissue, and these types are simple and stratified, and you need to know the different types and their subtypes. One important issue for nursing students to recognize is the pressure placed on tissue cells can quickly become what we call a decubitus ulcer, or a lying down ulcer, or a bed sore. This is a critical function for you to know from now on. When you monitor your patient's skin tissue, you're looking for a breakdown. Connective tissue is the most abundant of the tissue types throughout the body. Connective tissue is found in the blood, under the skin, in the bone, and around organs. As the name suggests, it connects. There are many types of connective tissue: loose connective, dense fibrous connective, cartilage, bone, and the liquid connective tissue. There is a table also describing these. Nervous tissue makes up the brain, spinal cord, and nerves. Neurons are nerve cells that transmit electrical signals to and from the brain and spinal cord. Muscle tissue is composed of cells that shorten or contract. In doing so, they cause movement of a body part. They are called fibers rather than cells because they are long and slender. These are the muscle tissues. The types of muscle tissues include skeletal, which is called striated muscle, smooth muscle, visceral, and cardiac muscle. Remember, the heart is a muscle. We tend to forget that sometimes, but the heart is a muscle. Now, speaking of tissue repair, in your book there is a description of how the tissue is repaired. First there's an injury, and how then it bleeds, and the cells unite, and then there's a scab, that sort of thing. You need to know those steps of tissue repair. I believe I have a video posted on that. And then membranes are thin sheets of tissue that cover surfaces that line body cavities. So there are many body cavities that are encircled by a membrane, and they the body cavities and also the organs, they surround organs. They are classified as epithelial or connective tissue, but they are thin sheets of tissue that cover these surfaces. So that is a fast review of Unit 1. I hope you find it interesting to be able to hear me say some of the terms, and then that will connect as you do your reading, your diagramming, that sort of thing. So, best wishes. Thank you.